From the mother's womb, the newborn child cries, and these teardrops continue to fall even unto this generation of youth. Every tear of every child is a painful gesture of a universal confession of the fall of mankind from perfection to corruption, suffering, and death. This cry does not grow fainter as we grow older. On the contrary, in these times worthy of much lamentation, the cry grows louder and is the only consolation of the youth of today. This generation of youth, which could very well be the last generation, is shackled in despair to this cry because they see all too well that this broken world is coming to an end. And no one has told them the truth that in the apocalypse, God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. But they have been taught by violence that this eternal truth is relative. Alone, imprisoned in this world, we are brainwashed into believing that there is no absolute truth and that there is no answer to the question, why? After spending our childhood in such a cold prison, it's no wonder that in our youth we seek death. When there is no answer to the question, why, the only freedom seems to be suicide. When there is no truth in a world of falsehood, when there is no beauty in an ugly world, when there is no love in a world of violence and hate, when there is no God in a faithless world, it's no wonder that in every room, on every street, in every city, the weeping of the young can be faintly heard. At least to those few who want to listen. This breaking down of our world is due to one philosophy, one mission that has been victorious over man's freedom of thought since time began. Nihilism. It chooses the young for its victims, for it is easy to manipulate and scar the innocence of youth, which can make the soul sick for the rest of its life. It is this machine that controls the spirit of these times and tells us that there is no answer to the question, why? And therefore no reason to live at all. It is this machine of apostasy that has given birth to the youth of today. We are her children. We are the children of nihilism. We are the youth of the apocalypse. Now we are left with a generation that is dying off due to suicide, the last genocide. This genocide can only be stopped by truth. In order to embrace this truth, we must die to this world and be resurrected. This is the unshackling. This is the last true rebellion. We are conceived in darkness. With eyes sealed shut, we enter the world with a scream. For some of us, the suffering begins in the womb, and for others, it begins when we take our first breath. Then, we open our eyes and we see our first view of the world. It is then that the building of our worldview begins. Every experience, all the information, all the things we are taught begin to shape how we see and understand the world. When we are young, we rely on the adults to introduce us to the world and protect us from evil and suffering. However, grown-ups can be quick to let us down. We trust that we can be taken care of, sheltered from the world and all the suffering it offers, but this does not happen. As we grow older and begin to think about the world, we ask questions, we seek answers, but are given superstition, hypocrisy, data, or ignorance. Our worldview is thus informed and takes shape. We are told lies and partial truths, and brick upon brick is laid until, in the end, we are sitting in a room without windows, staring at a cold stone wall. Our worldview, which is the framework by which we see and understand the world, is based on a few simple questions. They can be found in the upper left corner of a painting. The painter was wrestling with the three fundamental questions that all humans end up asking. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? These questions of origin, purpose, and destiny are fundamental to human thought, and the worldview that we form in childhood and throughout life has at its core an answer to these questions. For some of us, finding answers is life or death, and we continue to receive hypocrisy, confusion, and ignorance for answers. In the end, the room we eventually find ourselves in is a panic room of despair called being in darkness. We seek peace but cannot find it. We seek comfort, but there is no one to console, because we discover everyone is sitting in their own dark, lonely, cold room. Whether subliminal or completely overt, we are told that pleasure and happiness are the primary goals of life. We get this messaging from all advertising, music, and movies, and virtually all media. You would think that if we do what we want, when we want, this would make us happy. This can't be farther from the truth. We do what we want, but for some reason, depression, despair, discontentment, unhappiness, and suicide are increasing at surprising rates. We have more comfort than all previous generations in all of history. We have homes with indoor plumbing. We have immense warehouses where we can find every form of alcohol imaginable, and drugs are permitted, even prescribed. We can indulge ourselves for hours by binge watching all forms of content. We can get high, get drunk, get lost in social media at will. Then, we find ourselves slaves of our own pleasures. We become addicts and puppets of our desires, and the darkness gets darker. Since God is dead and is bleeding to death under our knives, someone must take the place as master. In a world void of mystical experience, some seek a door to another world, but not just through insanities, through direct contact. The world of the occult seems to possess a key to this door. For many, the key is sex, drugs, or violence, but for some, in Satanism. After sifting through the ashes of wannabe occult fashions, we'll see two broad categories of the occult: softcore and hardcore. Softcore occult is basically the fashionable rebirth of paganism, nature worship, and the exploration of the little-known natural powers of the soul, such as mental telepathy, astral projection, reading auras, tarot, levitation, etc. People are drawn to it typically not out of a conscious rebellion against God, but out of a curiosity and vanity, the desire to acquire special powers or insights that would raise them above the common masses. Hardcore occult is deliberate Satan worship. Such people will actually call themselves Satanists. This is a conscious rebellion against God, for one cannot believe in Satan without believing in God. And not just any God, but specifically the Christian God. It is the belief that God is the tyrant of the universe, and that Satan is man's best friend, who wants to give him freedom and make him happy by helping him get all he wants in this world. When a man or woman is initiated into the 7th degree of Satanism, he swears that his principle will be, nothing is true and everything is permissible. In these times of annihilation beyond desolation, when destruction is the norm, it is obvious who the master is, since Satan cannot create, but only destroys. The main problem with both kinds of the occult as a faith is that they have no understanding of what lies behind the curtain of this world. In ignorance, they dabble in the other world, without any distinction or discernment between the evil and good powers in the other world. The result of this ignorance is that the person playing in metaphysics, as a rule, ends up tapping into the evil side, even if that was not his original intent. The following is an account of a young man who grew up in a shattered home and found an escape in a cult.
Yeah, we got the lights set up there.
Yeah, the recorder's showing full. I'm getting full recorder on it.
I grew up pretty normal, I guess you could say, or at least I feel like that's the case. Just a normal young kid turned punk who rebelled against everything. But one day a friend of mine invited me to a party that consisted of some friends from high school and two older ladies. And it turned out that the older women, the two older women, actually practiced a form of magic, funny enough. I was initiated into the practice of Wicca, a form of modern pagan goddess witchcraft. As I learned this practice, my mind sank into a strange sort of delirium. I began to feel all-powerful and almost invincible. I was wrong. One night, I woke up and, due to a rather strong call of my bladder, I decided to go to the bathroom. I then realized that my entire body was paralyzed from the neck down. In Wicca, there are no drugs or alcohol. And I felt something different. I felt something almost spiritual was attacking me. I left my body and sort of suspended myself above it. I then went into shock. Sitting all around me and holding me down were, I'd say, about 15 demons, laughing hysterically. One looked at me and said I was the biggest idiot it had met in a long time. It said that I was taught what was right, but went the wrong way. And now I was so deep into it, I was going to hell, and there was no way out. He then went on to make a deal with me. Two of them turned me around, and I found myself in what quite literally looked and felt like hell. And I'm having trouble. There's no real way to describe what I saw. They then gave me the ultimatum. I could either kill myself and become like them and torment instead of being tormented. Or die and go to hell anyway. I chose suicide. Just before they let me return to my body, I said under my breath, "Jesus, if you're there, help." Immediately there was a great flash of light, and they were gone. I sat up and I began to curse God. Why did he let me go through these things? What was all this about? Why me, you know? I cursed at him for about an hour, I'd say, while I cleaned up the vomit my body expelled during the experience. It was then that I, for the first time, heard the voice of God. He said only one simple phrase that stopped me in my tracks. He said, "All I wanted you to do was ask."
This is a blatant and extreme example, but more subtle examples of this lurking in our modern culture can be found in all artistic forms, especially music. This autonomous religion is supported by a framework of materialism and consumerism that is merged with the cult of personality and the worship of celebrity. We worship things, status, money, and fame. This modern form of the occult is softer than the blatant worship of evil. It is subtle and it is sweet, therefore far more dangerous. We have embraced darkness. We have followed the commandments of the spirit of the times and have found ourselves in a catch-22. We've been educated on sex, drugs, and violence by the stimulation of media. We've passed the course of nihilism, aced the tests on apathy and boredom, and have graduated from the school of destruction. The Greek philosopher of antiquity, Aristotle, said, "School and education is for teaching the young what they should like and dislike." Modern education has taught us that we should dislike even a possibility of a God, let alone the reality. It has taught us that we should focus solely on succeeding in this world and thus fall away from heaven. It has made Nietzsche's philosophy of suicidal insanity mandatory reading, giving justification to murder God. The irony is that when we truly live up to what we've been taught in the institutions of this world, we are again institutionalized and put either in a padded room or a room with bars, and again given a number. In this school, some of the teachers go by the names of activism and revolution. They claim to be against the system and in defense of the suffering, but in fact they have become the system and utilize the system for their own benefit and power. This is the contemporary manifesto of deception. Our supposed rebellion against the system has itself turned into the worst system. Rebellion is in the bloodstream of modern man. The goal of rebellion is revolution, which, as Nietzsche explained, produces, quote, completely new conditions of existence, unquote. The path to this is destroying the old belief system and ushering in a new way of thinking. For a society to change its thought process, a relentless campaign of ideas, slogans, and new morals must occur. The nihilistic and anti-theistic annihilation of the traditional or old way of thinking is the way of a new education. The current modern ideologies that are taking root may very well be the last re-education experiment we will ever see. We understand that reason leads to thinking, which evolves over time. And the furtherance of knowledge is inevitable and can be even good. However, the end result is better when it concludes with wisdom and virtue that benefits and nurtures everyone in society. Because of the human condition, modern man seems to default continually to a knowledge that ends with power, control, and greed. This last re-education, which is the system, is spreading swiftly and stealthily. It started spreading with the so-called Enlightenment, continued with various Western political systems, and nested quietly in the Western university institutions. Now our thinking has been infected, by way of re-education, with nihilism, relativism, and materialism as the core doctrines of our new religion. This has paved the way for the final unleashing of terror, the spirit of Antichrist. In history, there have been many who have had the face of Antichrist, one who seeks power and greed and often bloodshed to bring people down on their knees. From Nero to Hitler to Genghis Khan to Mao Zedong to Stalin, the world has always had a surplus of evil teachers and leaders. But pointing the finger at the more obvious atrocities performed by antichrists in the past is too easy. We will reveal the core of the terror that is found not in history's power-hungry villains, but in the spirit of the age, which is much more frightening. The institutions of higher education, which in the West end up shaping the worldview of society as a whole, used to be all about diverse thought, sharing of ideas and open debate with mutual respect. This old way of thinking has been successfully eliminated. Today, if a person shares or expresses an idea or belief that is not approved by the re-education authorities, which is now the majority, they are swiftly condemned and often socially destroyed. What is the new re-education institution, if not an anti-human doctrine that is the throne of Antichrist, the corrupted imitation and inversion of the kingdom of God? It is not claiming to fight injustice, but using injustice as its means to prevail. Is it not declaring healing, but causing harm and suffering? Is it not posturing righteousness, but its actions are an abomination? Is it not convincing all that love is the goal, but hate ends up becoming the outcome? The most extreme denier, the most disillusioned of men, can only exist if he clings to one illusion in which he can place all of his hope. He who cannot live for the love of God must and will live for the Antichrist. As the author of the book of Revelation said, "And the world and its desires will pass away, but whoever does the will of God will live forever." Little children, it is the last time, as you have heard that Antichrist shall come. Even now there are many Antichrists. By this you know that it is the last times. We can reject this re-education experiment. The new martyr and wonderworker Ephrem lived in Greece in the 14th century. His father died when he was young, and his pious mother was left to care for 7 children by herself. When Ephrem reached the age of 14, he entered the monastery on the mountains just east of Athens, Greece. Being inflamed with love of God, Ephrem eagerly placed himself under the monastic discipline. For nearly 27 years, he imitated the life of the great fathers and ascetics of the desert. With divine zeal, he followed Christ and turned away from the attractions of this world. Eventually, he was ordained to the priesthood and served at the altar with great reverence and compunction. On September 14th, 1425, the barbarous Turks launched an invasion by sea, destroying the monastery and looting the surrounding area. Many of the monks had been tortured and beheaded, but Saint Ephrem remained calm. This infuriated the Turks, so they imprisoned him in order to torture him and force him to deny Christ. And they beat him every day, hoping to convince him to become a Muslim. For several months he endured horrible torments, and when the Turks realized that the saint remained faithful to Christ, they decided to put him to death. On Tuesday, May 5th, 1426, they led him from his cell. They turned him upside down and tied him to a mulberry tree. Then they beat him and mocked him. "Where is your God?" they asked, "and why doesn't he help you?" The saint did not lose courage, but prayed, "O God, do not listen to the words of these men, but may thy will be done as thou hast ordained." His blood flowed and his clothes were in tatters. His body was almost naked and covered with many wounds, and still the Turks were not satisfied. One of them took a flaming stick and plunged it violently into the saint's navel. They repeated the same painful torments many times, and soon he grew too weak to speak. So he prayed silently, asking God to forgive his sins. Then he lapsed into unconsciousness. Thinking that he had died, the Turks cut the ropes which bound him to the tree, and the saint's body fell to the ground. Their rage was still not diminished, so they continued to kick and beat him. After a while, the saint opened his eyes and prayed, "Lord, I give up my spirit to thee." At about 9 o'clock in the morning, the spirit's soul was separated from his body. Saint Ephrem's story was lost in time for 500 years, until 1950. At this time, the place where he lived and died was a small women's monastery. And one day, the head of the convent, Abbess Makaria, was wandering through the ruins of the monastery, thinking of the martyrs whose bones had been scattered over the grounds.
Αυτή τη στιγμή άκουγα μια φωνή μέσα μου και μου έλεγε «Σκάψε εκεί», αλλά μόλις μου έλεγε το «σκάψε εκεί», έβλεπα και πού να σκάψω, το μέρος. «Σκάψε εκεί και θα βρεις», μου έλεγε η φωνή. «Σκάψε εκεί συνέχεια και θα βρεις και όλο το ίδιο». Και μου έδειχνε το μέρος που έσκαβα. Οπότε πήρα κάποιον άνθρωπο να με βοηθήσει στο σκάψιμο. Και ενώ έδειχνα στον άνθρωπο, μου λέει πού θα σκάψω, και θα έδειχνα το μέρος που θα έσκαβε. Και εκείνο δεν ήθελε εκεί παντάπαση να σκάψει τίποτα. Τέλος πάντων, αφού είδα ότι δεν επρόκειτο να με ακούσει, να σκάψει εκεί που του έλεγα, τον άφησα ελεύθερο, πήγαινε όπου θέλεις και σκάψε, με την πεποίθηση ότι θα γυρίσει πίσω βέβαια, να σκάψει εκεί που ήθελα. Και έτσι έγινε. Πήγε σε 3-4 μέρη και δεν μπόρεσε να σκάψει, γιατί εγώ έμεινα εκεί και παρακαλούσα να μην μπορεί να σκάψει όπου πάει. Και έτσι δεν μπόρεσε να σκάψει και μετά πήρε την απόφαση και ήρθε. Τέλος πάντων, λέει, ας σκάψουμε εδώ, αφού δεν μπορούσε να κάνει διαφορετικά. Και όπως έσκαβε λοιπόν, το έλεγα σιγά μην κουράζει, αλλά εγώ φοβόμουν να μην μου κάνει ζημιά σε αυτό που περίμενα. Και αφού φτάσαμε σε ένα μέτρο, σε ένα βάθος 1,70, θα ήταν περίπου ας πούμε εκεί, αυτή βρέθηκε το κεφαλάκι του. Του λέω, άντε τώρα, ευχαριστώ πολύ, πήγαινε και γιατί κουράστηκες. Και έφυγε αυτός και εγώ μόνη με το χέρι μου ήθελα για να το προσέξω, γιατί έσκαβε πολύ νευρικά και κάπως επειδή δεν το ήθελε. Αυτό και το ύβρο το λείψανε ολόκληρο βέβαια. Και προσπάθησα να πάρω το χώμα από πάνω και να το δω ολοκληρωμένο. Ήθελα.
Later that evening, Mother Macaria heard footsteps coming from the grave, moving across the courtyard and coming toward the door of the church. She was afraid to turn around and look, but then she heard a voice. "How long are you going to leave me here?" She saw a tall monk with small round eyes whose beard reached his chest. In his left hand was a bright light, and he gave a blessing with his right hand, then disappeared. In the morning, Mother Macaria cleaned the bones and placed them in a niche in the altar area of the church, and lit a candle before them. That night, Saint Ephrem appeared to her in a dream. He thanked her for caring for his relics, and he said, "My name is Saint Ephrem." From his own lips, she heard the story of his life and martyrdom. Throughout the world, Saint Ephrem is known for helping those addicted to drugs. In the 1990s, a young man in America was struggling with drug addiction. Due to an overdose, the young man ended up in a hospital in a coma. Once he miraculously came to, he said to those in the room that he saw a man who looked like a radiant monk who came to him and said, "I have been praying for you. God has given you another chance. You will live, but you must correct your life. Go to Greece and visit the resting place of my bones. Give thanks to God for your salvation. My name is Ephrem." Many of the youth of today have come to the conclusion that the only hand left to wipe the tears from their eyes is the hand of suicide. Many, while perhaps admitting the truth of some of our observations, would condemn them as a whole for being one-sided. In all fairness, then, we must examine the other side, the positive view. And indeed, it cannot be questioned that, beside the current of despair, disillusionment, and subhumanity that we have described as emerging from this era of nihilism, there has been a parallel current of optimism and idealism. This can be found in some young people who can be idealistic and practical, able to cope with the different problems of today and to spread this undefined ideal. Scientific research discovering the mysteries of the universe, pacifists and nonviolent idealists, peace, brotherhood, world unity, and the overcoming of age-old hatreds. Young artists angry for the cause of justice and equality are spreading, as best they can in this sorry world, a new message of joy and creativity. And the great numbers of more ordinary young people who are enthusiastic to be alive in these exciting times look with confidence and optimism to the future, to a world that may at least know some happiness instead of misery. Meanwhile, the older generation is much too scared by this era of nihilism to share fully the high hopes of these positive youth of today. But the question must be asked: if the world is becoming such a better place, why are so many people killing themselves? Why are the masses miserable and overburdened by anxiety and hopelessness? And why is depression and addiction so common? General unhappiness is the norm, and because of this, suicide seems to be rising in proportions unheard of in the history of the world. It has become the last genocide. The notion of dying has become normalized and even popularized, inspiring the young to kill themselves not only with guns, razor blades, ropes, and poison, but by the slow suicide of drugs and alcohol. Depression and suicide are even romanticized in movies and music. We say of ourselves we are comfortably numb. To desire to be numb is to admit that there is pain, for without pain, there is no need to find comfort in being numb. We convince ourselves that we need to be numb not only once in a while, but all the time. For the pain inflicted by this corrupt world is continual. Through peer pressure in a destruction-bound world where there seems to be no physicians of the soul, we hold the needle in our own hand and kill our own pain. The infection and the cure of suicide then sets in. This infection is no longer relegated to the fringe of society, but has become common, even normalized. Most of us have known someone who has taken their life, but even more shocking, many of us have contemplated or attempted suicide at least once. In the United States alone, a suicide is said to occur approximately every 10 minutes. Simply put, we are suffering and we want the suffering to stop. Most of us are trying to escape from a situation that seems impossible to deal with, or to get relief from really bad thoughts or feelings that torment us. We don't want to die as much as we simply want to escape from what is going on. And at that particular moment, dying can seem like the only way out, the only way to make the hurting stop. We might be experiencing intense feelings of rejection, hurt, or loss, or feelings of being unwanted, unloved, isolated, and lonely. We might be worried about disappointing friends or family, or feel like a burden to others. Some of us might feel angry, ashamed, or guilty about something, and others may be living a nightmare where people are causing us social, emotional, or even physical harm. One thing is certain. Before the trauma, we were okay, even happy. Then something happened. This could have happened either slowly over time, or it could have been related to an event or events that robbed us of our hope and happiness. leaving us with misery and self-imprisonment. After this trauma, we learn to be in a mode of survival, getting by each day with a pretend smile, living a fake life to ensure others think we are doing fine, all the while we are suffering. Why do some of us get through this and others don't? Some of us seem to be more resilient while others can barely make it through the day. Some of us slowly collapse over time like a dying star, while others endure with some sort of strength and become better for it. We all have different coping thresholds, whether from our environment or the disposition we were born with. Regardless, we all deserve better. We all deserve faith, hope, and love. Where do we find it? Thus concludes selected chapters from Youth of the Apocalypse. You can find the full book in the link below. It was Thursday. The day was gloomy, the snow lay 8 inches deep on the ground, and dry, crisp snowflakes were falling thickly from the sky when Saint Seraphim began his conversation with me in a field near his hermitage. Opposite the river Sarovka, at the foot of the hill which slopes down to the riverbank, he sat me on the stump of a tree which he had just felled and squatted opposite me. "The Lord has revealed to me," said the great elder, "that in your childhood you had a great desire to know the aim of our Christian life, and that you have continually asked many great spiritual people about it. I must admit that from the age of 12 this thought had constantly troubled me. In fact, I had approached many clergy about it. However, their answers never satisfied me. This couldn't have been known to the elder. But no one," continued Saint Seraphim, "has given you a precise answer. They've said to you, go to church, pray to God, do the commandments of God, do good. That is the aim of the Christian life. Some were even indignant with you for being occupied with such profane curiosities and said, do not seek things which are beyond you. But they didn't speak as they should. Now, humble Seraphim will explain to you what the aim really is."